I watched The Santa Clauses, a new Disney Plus series to determine, is it worth your time? Let's find out.
Calm down, no.
Who are you?
I'm the Batman.
I spent an hour scouring the internet looking for a clip I'd heard of Tim Allen explaining what convinced him to come back for this miniseries. I was unsuccessful, but to summarize, he said bringing Last Man Standing creator Jack Burdett on to run the show gave him the motivation to come back. Now, I really enjoyed Last Man Standing and I love Tim Allen. From Home Improvement to the original Santa Claus to Galaxy Quest, you can rely on him more often than not to put out a good product. Look, here's the thing. I'm not going to stick to a mystery format for this one, leading you down a path to my ultimate conclusion. I'm not going to be able to talk about this series and keep my thoughts about it secret. So let's just get this out of the way. The Santa Clauses is bad. Like, really bad. Like, I'm mind blown the ratings on Rotten Tomatoes for this are above 50%. I would put it in the 30% range. Also, from this point forward, there are sure to be spoilers. So if you're still planning to watch it, I mean, don't. But if you must, do so first and then come back later. I'll be waiting for you. I guess you could just pause this and then come back. Anyway, I'm gonna keep moving on. You may be thinking, well, of course you didn't like it. The series wasn't made for you. It was made for little kids. You're right. And that's actually one of my bigger problems with the series. The original Santa Claus was a family movie. It had a wide appeal to both kids and parents alike. I can watch it today and appreciate it as a good movie, not just for nostalgia value. Like much of what Disney used to put out, it was made so you, the parent, would actually want to take your kids to see a movie. Disney had a hard line, never stooping to the level of fart and poop jokes. But that's been changing in the last decade. In one of the first scenes of the show, one of the elves vomits sparkles, which didn't add to the humor, it was just unnecessary. I'm sure kids like it, but it's low-hanging fruit, and it exemplifies how the quality of Disney content has taken a steep nosedive. This is coming from a person whose house is packed full of Disney paraphernalia. To say my wife and I are Disney fans is to put it lightly. You literally can't look a direction in our house without spotting a Mickey Mouse clock, Thomas Kincaid painting, Disney board game, or even a Mickey Mouse cheese board. Peter Pan is looking over my shoulder at this very moment. Disney is a shell of its former self, and you can argue it's because of wokeness, or Bob Chapek, or Bob Iger, or a new kind of animation style, but I say it's because they don't put story first anymore. This is apparent in pretty much everything they do these days. Seriously, what was the last truly great thing Disney put out? Avengers Endgame? But you have to go back even further for an original Disney IP. Maybe Moana in 2016? Look, maybe it's just a bump in the road, but I think it's a change in philosophy. The magic is fading as they focus more on acquiring outside IP and less on making a perfect product. But enough about the murder of our childhoods. In an interview with Jimmy Fallon, Tim Allen said he wanted to fill in the plot holes created by the original 3 Santa Clauses, which I think is totally unnecessary. There's a certain level of suspension of disbelief we allow in works of fiction, and sometimes filling in those holes just results in ruining the magic. One such plot hole was the idea that in the first movie, Scott scared Santa off a roof and killed him. I never made that assumption. Like Gandalf, I believe Santa had made a conscious choice to let himself drop, just so that he could retire and pass the mantle. I always just assumed old Santa was sipping a Mai Tai on a beach in the Bahamas. Instead, they found it necessary to explain away the situation, telling us Scott was the first human Santa, and the previous ones had been spirits of Christmas. Honestly, that doesn't make any sense, because St. Nicholas was a human. Look, I appreciate the attempt to bring Christmas back to its religious roots, but as my Christian friends would probably say, Santa isn't the reason for the season. The characters in the series were shallow and lacked clear motivation. Kumar Santa, whatever his real name was, didn't make any sense. There was no reason why Scott should have selected him as a replacement in the first place. But once he didn't stick around to mentor him for a year. Nope, you just let him do his poorly motivated Amazon competitor thing, which didn't make any sense either. As the elves were disappearing, he didn't seem worried at all. Who was making the products for your business if the elves were gone? The whole thing should have failed because the magic was gone and his workers were gone. But nope, it was all well and good with him. Also, his big climatic moment of change was stupid. He looked into a snow globe and remembered the advice his wife had given him to be a present father. So he knew the advice the whole time and just ignored it till then. We didn't really see an internal conflict or anything. Speaking of motivations that don't make any sense, Scott's, well, his made some sense. He was worried he was getting old and should retire to be a better husband and father. So they all leave the North Pole so his kids can grow up normal and his wife can get a real job, I guess. But then they just go back to the North Pole without resolving any of that. Those issues still exist, but they just ignore them in the end. And speaking of the climax, It was so weak. The magic of Christmas was fading, and it was solved literally with a group hug. Seriously? A group hug saves Christmas? There's no battle, there's no struggle, there's no life or death stakes? Nothing? It just left the whole series feeling hollow and pointless. He goes back to being Santa, now riding in the sleigh with his family, but so what? His kids have some magical powers, but he already has the same powers as his son, and his daughter's power to talk to animals seems unnecessary. Plus, couldn't he understand the reindeer in the movies? It was just the audience who couldn't, so even her power isn't unique or special. The series, and especially the last episode, was packed full of unearned emotional moments. Characters hugging, who I didn't even realize were friends, and other characters loosely introduced in the first episode came back in the last one for no reason. It just felt like a bunch of twists a second grader might write into a story when they're forced to free write. To add to this, Mrs. Claus's motivation seems so forced. She created this narrative that Mrs. Claus is an angry old lady who nobody knows anything about. But I'm pretty sure the series also said she was the first Mrs. Claus. So like, what is Mrs. Claus based on if she's the first one? Plus, Mrs. Claus always appears to be a kind woman. You know, the strong woman behind the strong man. But instead they make her a character desperate for recognition. Great lesson to teach a generation of kids who are obsessed with being social media influencers. And on top of it all, the fight scene she had with the toy soldiers was just so cringe. They were just trying to make it epic, but it was just pathetic. The two main elves, Noel and Betty, were kind of a weird addition. They weren't great actors, so they felt like kids the whole time, even though they were supposed to be hundreds of years old. Also, they were a married couple, but because they looked and acted like kids, it just felt a little creepy. As for the Italian Christmas witch, I appreciated the fact that they included her. She's an actual folktale from history, but as a character in the show, she was confusing. She seemed evil at first, but then she wasn't, but then she stole Santa's coat for some reason, but then she lost it. I don't know what her motivation was. She was one-dimensional, and then on top of it all, she shared an awkward feminist moment with Mrs. Claus that didn't add anything or really even make any sense. She was just another half-baked idea which they shoehorned into the story. The security guard elf was the only fun character in the show. Sure, like everyone else, he wasn't a good actor, but at least his character was well developed and the lines were funny. I would watch a spin-off episode of this guy, even though every line would be horribly executed. Tim Allen says he wanted to make this series in part to fill in a lot of original plot holes, but in the end, this series created far more than it resolved. In addition to the ones I already brought up, why didn't Noel disappear when all the other elves did? He had lost all hope, yet for some reason, he was fine. It also ripped off Elf, where Santa's magic is powered by Christmas spirit, but then only followed this rule on and off throughout the series. The visuals were fine, but what was the deal with that intro sequence? It felt like a bad acid trip, which had nothing to do with the show itself. It was like a middle schooler said, "Hey guys, you know what would look cool? Let's have the intro be weird music and trippy visuals." And no one stopped to ask if that was a well-motivated choice. Also, all computer animation in the show was subpar. It was literally about the same quality as the 1994 original movie. The sets and costumes were fine, but even so, nothing felt engrossing. They were all just there, doing the bare minimum effort. I don't remember the music, so it probably was uninspired as well. All of this leads me to a different question than I usually answer. Instead of asking if the Santa Clauses is good, I have to ask if the Santa Clauses has anything good about it. Tim Allen's performance isn't horrible, but even he feels like he's half-assing it throughout. There are no good actors in the bunch. Some step up to the roles for a scene or two, but it honestly felt like lower quality stuff than Disney Channel original movies. So what was good about it? Somehow it kept me going for 6 episodes. I'm not sure why. I guess nostalgia value. It was cool that Charlie and Bernard had cameos, and there was a nice message buried somewhere in there about how you can't get what you want all the time or nothing will be special, but honestly, I'm reaching with all of these. I hate to say it, but this was one of the worst things I've watched all year. Throughout the whole series, I felt like every scene was ripped out of a beginner improv show. If you've ever been to one, you know what I mean. None of the characters feel real. They're all just standing in a room, talking to each other about something random without doing any object work. Just standing there. And you're just wanting the scene to end. So hopefully we can get to the next scene that's actually funny. But the next scene isn't funny. Nor is the next one, and 30 minutes in, you're left unsatisfied, wondering why you spent $5 to watch a car crash. Blaine. Well, at least it was only a 6-episode miniseries. Oh god, no. Thank you for subscribing. Am I totally off base, or do you guys agree that this show totally sucked? Leave a comment below, and I promise I'll get back to you. I want to start a community of film lovers, so let's chat. Oh, and now check out this other controversial film opinion of mine.